Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, my name is Steve Faulkner. My talk's entitled Chasing Unicorns. So this is going to kind of touch on some of the stuff Dale actually talked about earlier, but from the developer side. So like I said, my name's Steve. I am at South Pole Steve. My current claim to fame is that I went to the South Pole once, so I hope to do something better than that eventually. So that's kind of the plan, but at least that's what I'm known as now. I work for Murphy.com and I'm a developer and product manager there. So chasing unicorns, what I mean by unicorns is I mean designer developers. So we got like, people talked about this earlier, there's like half designers, half developers here. Kind of got a mix of both. Sometimes you have to talk to each other, right? And in these like super awesome cases, it's the same person, right? Like they're these amazing people who can design and develop, but the truth is it's just like, really, it's a unicorn, right? There's just not a lot of people that are out there like that. They can't do both sides. You need both roles in your company. So we've run into this at Murphy, and I've run into other projects I work on. And the problem is that we started looking for these kind of people is because we want to find people that can work in the full stack. We need them to be able to work everywhere, and it's expecting a lot. So I kind of spent some time, and I ended up giving this presentation in Boston at the Boston Ruby meetup. And I was kind of exploring the ideas of why do we, why are we looking for this? Like what kind of things or development practices are we using that led to this? So I'm going to show a bunch of code, so I apologize to anybody who doesn't code at all, because you might be a little lost. But this is, this is HTML, right? Okay, like I got a header here, and inside I'm gonna, this is ERB, I'm gonna dump in the post title, right? You can give this to a designer, right? You can give this to somebody, and the designer who does HTML can kind of look at it and be like, all right, I know what's going on, this is straightforward. But then we start getting into things where we use like Haml, and we're like, okay, well, that's a little bit different, right? Some designers who just know HTML might get that and be like, all right, I don't know what's going on. And it gets a little bit scary. But then, the reality is that this is what ends up happening. This is like actual code from Murphy. So it becomes absolutely terrible, right? You have all of this logic that ends up showing up in your views. Regardless of whether you use Rails or not, that's what this is. But basically your HTML just becomes, completely intertwined with all of the logic that you have with your app. And there's all these things that people try to do to stop this from happening, but it happens, right? Eventually it happens. And we even do things where we try to use helper methods, and we take some of that logic and we pull it out and we put it back into our application, which is great, but the problem is this helper method sometimes is actually doing things that the designer needs to know about. So then there's some libraries out there that take this even further and turn helper methods into full-on classes where you have all these things, and they're really cool, and developers just love this stuff, right? Because you're like, great, I don't have to write HTML, now I get to write normal code in Ruby or whatever other language you are, and the problem is that that's shit for a designer, right? Like a designer is like, well, now all this stuff is happening, and if you give this to a designer, they're like looking at you like, wait, what? And the whole problem is that to get even to this point at all, they have to start up a server, right? I mean, has anybody had a developer ever come to them and say like, oh, we just have to install this stuff and start up the server and then you can view the product, right? I mean, designers are designing. They want to write HTML and make it look pretty and just open the HTML file. They don't want to worry about starting a server. So basically, what I was trying to get at with this presentation is I was trying to say that there needs to be a better tool, right? There needs to be a way to effectively abstract out the application part from the design part. And I've been looking a lot for tools like this, basically that would allow you to just open up something that has logic in it and have it automatically, parse out that logic and figure out where it should just insert dummy variables or dummy values. This is kind of the thing I want to be able to do. So I imagine that, I have not found this tool yet, so I imagine that what this thing might do is it would comment out whatever your logic is, and it would actually just insert a variable. So then you could just give a designer a file, and using this magical tool, they would be able to open up one of your files that has logic in it without ever having to start a server. So I know this is like a big idea, maybe a big problem, and I haven't found anybody that's solved it yet, but I really would love to be able to do that. If I was using Rails, I'd love to be able to go, Rails generates static. And this is just like what Dale talked about before, being able to say export as HTML, right? I'd like to be able to export my entire application as HTML, so it just gets dumped into static HTML files, and then anybody can go play around with it just as if it was a real application, but just with dummy variables in HTML. So that's like the end of the talk. I really don't have too much more because I haven't found anything that solved this. I'm really excited to talk to people if they want to talk about ways to do this. As a developer, it would be even cooler if the tool could go back and take those variables and actually reverse the process. And so a designer can take the static HTML, work with it a bunch, tweak on it, and then give it back to the developer, and the developer doesn't have to worry about, how am I going to modify all these things. That's it.